There we go. Right, good. So, this session will explore ways to rethink and remix content in numerous ways. So it can be searched, browsed, repackaged, sold, all to achieve a publisher's strategic objectives. In this session, we will try to cover things like fragmenting, bundling, collections, cross-selling, e-commerce, academic adoptions, community networks, SEO, many things that I hope we'll touch on, and if we don't, please hold us to task at the end with Q&A. So we have a lot of people in the room, and I hope that we can generate some questions at the end of the panel discussions today. So on the panel, we have, working that way, west, we have Alan Norn from O'Reilly Media, Brian Irwin from Slice Books, and Catherine Flack from Cambridge University. I will introduce each speaker as we go through this panel discussion here, and each one will speak for maybe 10 or 15 minutes, hopefully not longer than that. And I wanted to first just provide a bit of an overview as to what I think this subject is all about. So first, by way of introduction, I'm the Chief Operating Officer for Publishing Technologies Online Division. And we are a publishing platform applications provider for publishing companies across the world. We're a sponsor for this conference. I think you probably know that. We have a stand out in the conference area outside, so please come by and say hello after the conference, and happy to talk to you about what you might have on your mind or anything about this panel discussion. It was actually set up by my predecessor, Louise Russell. I've actually only been in this job for 5 weeks. But don't let that worry you, since I've been in this industry for quite a long time, both as a consultant and also as an operating executive. I've worked for companies as diverse as Wolters Kluwer and a number of small startups in the education space. So I've actually learned a lot about the types of things that we're going to talk about here today. Prior to 2006, which is actually when I started my consulting business, I ran a company called R.R. Bowker, which is a bibliographic database company. But then again, metadata is just another form of content. Before I was at Bowker, I was actually at PricewaterhouseCoopers as a consultant in their entertainment and media communications practice. And this was in the mid-90s, and we had many occasions to have very high-level prospecting visits with publishing customers, talking to them about how we could help them with non-format specific publishing. And of course, in those days, most of the format that the publishing companies were working with would have been print. But even today, in some of the work that I have done, it is still very much the case that most of our businesses are oriented around kind of the format of print. And I think we'll try and talk a little bit about how companies are migrating away from that and some of the challenges that they face as they do that. So there are some companies that are further along in the idea of creating flexible or modular or commoditized content, depending on, or call it what you will. Certainly much more so than in the mid-1990s. But when we were doing those presentations, the charts were really wonderful and fantastic and looked really spectacular. But actually, when they fell on deaf ears to the most part, because the publishers at that time really had very difficult time trying to deal with what it was that we were trying to propose to them in the way that we might be able to help them. Over the last couple of years, as I mentioned, as a consultant, I worked with a wide spectrum of publishing companies in the scholarly and academic marketplace. I think many of these companies are only really now starting to think about how they might reorganize and make fundamental changes to the way that they manage content. And we are at standing room only, so I think there's a few seats down here at the front, and if people wouldn't mind taking any stuff that they might have on their chairs off, that would be very helpful. So any people at the back that want to move to the front, that would be great. One of the initiatives that I worked on for about 18 months was working with a startup, and we created a very large database of academic journal and book content that was directed at the education market and the custom course pack business. We ultimately signed about 200 publishers to that platform, representing about 7 million items of content. And in that effort, I probably worked with many of you in this room. So during the process of that exercise, it became very clear to me that many publishers weren't really thinking about their content in any particular strategic way. And that's not necessarily a criticism, certainly not, but it does reflect the way that we've kind of embedded these processes into our organization, and we really need to start thinking differently about how we treat content much more as a strategic asset. So publishers are still very much oriented around the document, if you will. They find it very difficult to get their constituencies to think about the content in a different way, whether that be the author, the editor, production managers, even the owner of the business, and thereby allocate the time and the money and the effort that's required to actually make substantial changes in the way that their businesses operate. So all companies that are producing content should really start to think about creating a content strategy for your business. You probably have a set of very big picture strategic objectives for the business, but they probably aren't narrowly focused on how you might manage your content in a different way. And hopefully in the course of this panel discussion, we'll see how some companies are starting to do that. If you were to stop thinking about the format, for example, or the document, and think more about the content item, what do you think that would mean for your business? What processes might be impacted, and what relationships would need to change in your organization in order to adopt some of those changes? And what technology might you need? All of those types of strategic big picture questions should really be asked around the notion of creating that content strategy for your business. So you'd probably be able to set out some strategic objectives around that exercise, and then maybe some tactical objectives to enable you to reach those goals. So you're probably asking, well, how do we go about doing that? And again, you'll see probably some practical examples of how some companies here have done that in their approach to this particular problem. But the process might begin with an evaluation of your content. How is it now created? Who does all that work? What happens internally when that content comes into your organization once it's submitted by the author? So, and externally, how does the market react to your content? How do they use your content? So in my example of building that content library for that startup that I worked with, many of the book publishers that I worked with and spoke to did not have chapter level content. They had full book content, so they didn't have supporting metadata for that content. They didn't have abstracts, they didn't have keywords, they didn't have bibliographic information that described what that chapter was all about. In some cases, some of those chapters didn't actually have names. They had sequential numbering, so chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, etc. So it's not really the way that we would want to present the content to our users and our consumers that supports any type of flexible use. And I don't think anybody really that I worked with certainly would disagree with that. At the AAUP meeting last year in Chicago, I met with a number of publishers, and it was interesting to me that I heard fairly frequently that permissions revenue from many publishers has been increasing over the last several years, year on year. And I think that's a reflection of our constituencies, whether they be faculty or researchers, desire to actually use and hopefully even purchase parts of the content that you as publishers are producing. And if you're not enabling that, you're probably missing out with a growth opportunity there. As you might expect, and this is only a partial list, there's many new startups in the academic space that are looking to deliver content in new and flexible ways, particularly at the unit level, whether they be deep dive for journal articles, book chapters, or business cases from companies like Ginkgo Tree and Simtext, or full text content via companies like CourseLoad. These companies all struggle with your content. the way that they need to use it to deliver it to their customers. Their clients are researchers, they're academics, students, even consumers in some cases. And it shouldn't really be that way for that struggle to happen. And so you as the publisher should be able to offer a level of flexibility on that content. And moreover, you should be able to deliver that yourself rather than to have to oftentimes rely on some of these other third parties to deliver that to your customers on your behalf. I think in some respects, some of the struggle might all come to a head in the mobile space. So we're seeing consumers rush to mobile as their preferred choice for interacting with content. And I think as that content consumption increases, it's going to be increasingly difficult for a content producer like a publisher to supply all of those different types of mobile outlets in any really efficient way. And the only way they can do that is to cope. And what is cope? Well, cope is create once, publish everywhere. When you think about that, we're starting to see a number of publishers start to adopt this type of principle. It's another way of saying non-format specific content, which is what we were talking about in our presentations when I was at Pricewaterhouse back in 1997, a long time ago. So at Publishing Technology, we're at the center of this effort, and our pub-to-web solution is built from the ground up to manage content and supply a content management solution to support all manner of different types of business models, distribution services, enables a vast array of content administration tools. Our publisher clients are traditional academic publishers, associations, government agencies, all around the world. And again, if you'd like to learn more about that, obviously please come by our booth next door. So what are some of the strategic challenges where I think they should be opportunities for all of us? As I've been saying, I think you should start to think about what you need to do with your content in more strategic ways, and think of content as a strategic asset of the business. And you should really start to think about devising a strategic plan around that objective. Managed appropriately, assets, any asset of a business, should return some type of capital, some amount of capital invested. And the content you invest in should be no different from this. So when you get back to the office next week, in addition to my comments and those of my fellow panelists here, maybe some of the things that you might want to talk about when you get back there or think about are things like, what do I need to do to make our content process and our author relationships less dependent on format or the output format, and more defined by the object itself or the item itself. When you chunk content, and that is break it up into parts, you should also make sure that you maintain some type of web of interconnectedness with that content. So things like taxonomies and the way that you manage that content as you pull it into your databases, etc. Things like, can you involve the authors more actively in the process? Suggestions that you give authors an office in your building. God forbid you actually should have them incorporated into the actual process rather than wait for them to submit a manuscript to you. Bring them into the office, have them be part of the whole process. Thinking out of the box, thinking of different ways of bringing people together will actually address some of the types of things that we're talking about here. Look to other companies that are doing this well, and hopefully you'll refer to some of the folks on the panel here today, but there are many others doing this type of thing. How can you deconstruct what they're doing and appropriate that activity into your own organizations? And of course, looking at what the consumers want. They want content anywhere and everywhere, and so how do you deliver that to them? So with that overview, I hope that provides a good introduction to this subject, and we'll be happy to take questions at the end of the presentation. I have some questions I can ask the panel myself, but certainly would want to encourage all of you to join in that effort as well. And with that, I am going to pass it over to Catherine from Cambridge, and she is going to conduct her part of this discussion. So thank you very much.